Yeah, you're skinny. I know. Oh, the only one.
Turn my chair around a little bit. Over here.
Good morning. Do you need to test this?
Did you turn this on?
He did. So,
That's why I got this copy on the side, Harpo Mark.
testing.
Tell somebody turn it on. It's not on, Shirley. It's not on.
Yeah, Ron's messing with it, so I just thought I would tap.
Pick up, we can't hear you. Where's
I
Kevin?
don't think I need it. I didn't need it the first day.
I think you're right.
Could you say it a little louder?
Let's just go.
Okay, we will forego the technical difficulties and get started. So, good morning. So, my topic this morning is biblical boundaries, setting limits to regain our freedom. It's kind of hard to think about boundaries setting freedom, but it actually can. I won't be taking comments as usual while I'm speaking, but I want to leave time at the end for discussion. At first glance, boundaries seem negative and restrictive. No is not commonly thought of as a positive answer. I hope when I'm finished speaking, you will be able to see how setting appropriate boundaries in love helps us regain more freedom in our lives. I want to clarify that this is a basic introduction to boundaries. Anyone dealing with serious boundary violations needs to learn more about setting limits than I can give today. You need to practice setting boundaries with safe people first, as well as have supportive friends and sound counseling. Now let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries can be tangible or intangible. It's easy to see the boundaries in the physical world, fences around property, signs and walls. The boundaries I'm going to be talking about today are the ones we don't see in the physical realm. Some are emotional, spiritual, and those boundaries created by our words. Boundaries need to be communicated first verbally and then with action. They need to be clear. I want to first talk about what boundaries are and then what boundaries are not. Boundaries define who we are. They define what is me and what is not me. Boundaries show us where we end and someone else begins, leading us to a sense of ownership. And it shows what we are responsible for. A boundary is always about us, not the other person. We set boundaries to say what we will or will not do. Only this kind of boundary is enforceable. We do have control of ourselves. We do not have control of other people. Our no is for our needs, not against another person. Now, what boundaries are not? Boundaries are not a nifty technique to get something we want, nor a new way to control another person. Boundaries, setting a boundary is not demanding that someone else do something. Deciding to unload on another person all the wrongs you feel they have done isn't setting boundaries. This could distance you from the other person so much they might totally cut off the relationship. In setting boundaries, we are giving up trying to control another person and allowing him or her to take responsibility for their own behavior. On a personal note, I was not taught to set appropriate boundaries as I was growing up. I knew where the line was drawn in obeying my parents, but I never learned to stand up for myself with other people. My half-sister and half-brother were adults with their own families when I was born, so I was raised as an only child. We lived on a 55-acre farm and didn't have close neighbors. I was so excited when another child came to my home. It was easy to share all my toys and let them make all the decisions about our playtime. Kids who have siblings or close neighbors have many opportunities to learn give and take and how to say no to unfair situations. As an adult, I had a hard time saying no to those who wanted my help, my time, or who tried to control me. When I began to learn in my 50s that I could set boundaries, my life began to change. I read the book, Boundaries: When to Say Yes, When to Say No to Take Control of Your Life by the Christian authors Henry Cloud and John Townsend. For those who have children, there is a section in this book talking about how to teach boundaries to children. They also have a book entitled Boundaries with Kids, which I haven't read. I do have their CD and book on boundaries in marriage, and it is excellent in my opinion. Learning to set proper boundaries is a process that continues as we deal with new situations that arise. I have read many other books on this subject, some on people-pleasing, being too nice for your own good. One I really like is When Helping You is Hurting Me by Carmen Renee Berry. As I reviewed the 11 or so books in preparing for this seminar, I can see areas I still need to work on. I believe setting appropriate boundaries from love, and often with the tough love that James Dobson talks about, will enhance our lives in following God and biblical principles. There are laws mentioned throughout the Bible that give us boundaries to make our lives better. The Ten Commandments give us some of those boundaries. Let's look at some Bible verses about boundaries. Again, I'll give you the reference, but I'll read it from my notes. Deuteronomy 30:19. Deuteronomy 30:19. This day I call the heaven and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live. This is a boundary. We have a choice whether we will honor it or not. If we don't honor it, then we experience the consequences. Another one is Jeremiah 21:8-9. Jeremiah 21:8-9. Furthermore, tell the people, this is what the Lord says. See, I am setting before you the way of life and the way of death. Whoever stays in this city will die by the sword, famine, or plague. But whosoever goes out and surrenders to the Babylonians who are besieging you will live. They will escape with their lives. The people had to choose what they would do. Matthew 25:8-9. Matthew 25:8-9 is about the parable of the 10 virgins. Verse 8. And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. Verse 9. But the wise answered, saying, Not so, lest there not be enough for us and you. But go ye rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves. This is an excellent description of setting an appropriate boundary. They didn't share and said no. They also suggested an option for how the other virgins could take care of themselves. What if the foolish virgins had said to the wise virgins, You're being selfish. You have enough oil to share with us. We thought you were our friends. You are going to cause us to miss the bridegroom. We will remember how you treated us tonight. What if the wise virgins had caved in to the guilt messages of the foolish virgins? They would have likely missed the bridegroom when he came. The wise virgins set a clear boundary with no. Our no is not to attack or punish another. Remember, it's for us and not against others. It's to protect us and to allow us to develop the talents and treasures that God has allocated to us during our time here on earth. The next passage is Galatians 6, verses 2 and 5. Galatians 6, 2 and 5. Yes. Oh, I have it. I just didn't have my cayenne this morning to clear out the pipes, so still a little happening here. Thank you. The next, so Galatians 6, 2 and 5. Verse 2, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Verse 5, for every man shall bear his own burden. So on the surface, verse 2 and verse 5 seem to contradict each other, until we look deeper into what burdens mean in verse 2 and what burden means in verse 5. Verse 2 seems to be referring to a heavy weight that we truly need help carrying. Maybe an accident happens or someone becomes very ill. When those types of situations arise, we may need help from others. Verse 5 seems to be referring to a lighter weight, like the necessary responsibilities we have every day in everyday life. Working a job, preparing meals, and keeping our finances in order, for example. While we can choose to help others in these situations, it is not our responsibility. We are responsible to others and responsible for ourselves. When we deny ourselves to help someone when their load is too heavy, they can't carry it alone, we are showing the sacrificial love of God. This is being responsible to others. To become mature adults, we must know where we end and other people begin. Truly loving another person comes from free choice. Being with someone out of compliance or guilt is not love. The healthiest relationships involve both give and take. By having boundaries, we set limits on ourselves and others at appropriate times. We need to teach the people in our lives that we have needs too, and they bear some responsibility in appropriate ways for meeting our needs, just as we do in meeting their needs. This is particularly so in a family. There are times we have to take care of our own needs before we can help someone else. Our success or failure in life largely depends on us in the physical realm. Though we are to look to God and others for comfort, instruction, and love, we alone are responsible for our choices. 2 Corinthians 5:10. 2 Corinthians 5:10. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he had done, whether it be good or bad. We are deeply affected by our significant relationships, but we can't blame our problems on anyone other than ourselves. Now let's look at some reasons why adults have a hard time setting boundaries. Fear of hurting other people's feelings. Fear of abandonment or separateness. Fear of someone else's anger. Fear of punishment. Fear of being seen as bad or selfish. Fear of being unspiritual. Fear of feeling guilty. I want to elaborate on 3 of these. The first one is being selfish. Selfishness has to do with a fixation on our own wishes and desires to the exclusion of our responsibility to others. We are responsible for caring for our bodies, using our time wisely, and using the talents and gifts we have been given. This is not being selfish. If we don't take care of ourselves, we have nothing to offer anyone. 1 Corinthians 3:16. 1 Corinthians 3:16. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? The second reason why adults can't set boundaries that I want to talk about is guilt. If we say no, we feel guilty. Not because we have done something wrong, but because we aren't doing what someone else wants us to do. Guilt is a uniquely human emotion. It is the result of feeling excessively responsible for the emotions and our experiences of others. People use guilt to control other people. They may be trying to make you feel bad about how you spend your own time or your resources, about growing up and separating from your parents, or having a life separate from a friend. This list can go on and on. No weapon in the arsenal of the controlling person is as strong as the guilt message. People with poor boundaries easily internalize guilt messages that are leveled at them to make them feel bad. We don't have to accept the guilt messages or defend or explain our choice. If someone's feelings are hurt over our decisions, we can empathize with them, acknowledge they are disappointed, and tell them we understand. However, we may still need to make that choice. In the parable of the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 20, verse 15. Matthew 20, verse 15. The landowner asks, "Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good?" While setting boundaries is not the point of this passage, I believe it shows we are responsible for what belongs to us, and we can choose what we want to do with it. The landowner did not accept the guilt messages used on him. Here's a list of some of the guilt statements people can use on us. I've had a few of these used on me. "How could you do this to me after all I've done for you? It seems that you could think about someone other than yourself for once. If you really love me, you'd make this phone call for me. It seems like you would care enough about the family to do this one thing. You know how it's turned out in the past when you haven't listened to me. You know that if I had it, I'd give it to you. You have no idea how much we sacrifice for you." And this is the kicker. "Maybe after I'm dead and gone, you'll be sorry." Sometimes guilt messages are leveled at Christians. How can you call yourself a Christian? Doesn't the Bible say, honor your parents? You're not being very submissive. I'm sure that grieves the Lord. I thought Christians were supposed to think of others. You must really have a spiritual problem to be acting this way. While we need to be aware if we are being self-centered. Guilt messages are not given for our growth and good. They are given to manipulate and control. No one has the power to make us feel guilty. Something inside of us agrees with them on some level. Maybe it's how we were controlled as children, or from other relationships and events in our past. We have to own this problem and come to understand why we feel guilty when actually we have not done anything wrong. Allowing someone to push unwarranted guilt on us gives them power over us. We do not have to justify our choices or the decisions we have a right to make as adults. People who own their own lives on the physical level do not feel guilty when they make choices about where they are going. They listen to advice and counsel and take other people into consideration. When they make choices for the wishes of others, they are choosing out of love, not guilt, to advance a good, not to avoid being bad. We need to be careful not to assume blame in a situation that isn't ours. This is something that I did for several painful events in my past. On different times, I asked God to show me things that I need to deal with that I may not be aware of. On one of those occasions, I was made aware that I was carrying the entire blame for the problems that occurred. I began to see that while my choices may not have been good, as I was a teenager in at least two of the situations, the other people involved were making decisions too, and they were not in my best interest. I owned the mistakes I had made, and I asked for forgiveness. Then, as much as I was able, I forgave the other people. I talked to 3 close friends about one situation and asked them to honestly tell me what they thought was my fault in the problem. I really wanted to know if I was looking at this in a balanced way. I believe we need to be accountable for our mistakes and make amends where possible. I was able to lay down the blame and guilt I was assuming for so many years for the part that wasn't my fault. So now the third reason I'll talk about why adults can't set boundaries is anger. I want to make a couple of comments about feelings in general before specifically talking about anger. Feelings should neither be ignored or placed in charge. I really like this concept. Feelings should neither be ignored or placed in charge. Feelings come from our heart and can tell us the status of our relationships. They can tell us if things are going well or if there's a problem. If we feel angry, we have a problem that needs to be addressed. Our feelings are our responsibility, and we need to own them. For example, if I am angry at someone for something he or she did, it is my responsibility to go to that person and tell them I'm angry and why. Matthew 18:15. Matthew 18:15. Now, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. If we think the anger in the other is the other person's problem and they need to fix it, we could wait forever. Unresolved anger in us can turn to bitterness. Even if someone else has sinned against us, it is still our responsibility to deal with it, with ourselves. Now I'm going to talk about anger from two different perspectives. Anger is a feeling that rises up in us because someone is trying to hurt us, or someone we love, or our boundaries are being violated. Anger provides us with a sense of power to solve a problem. It energizes us to protect ourselves, those we love, and our principles. In Ephesians 4:26, it says, "Be ye angry and sin not, and let not the sun go down upon your wrath." We have a responsibility to use anger properly. The other aspect of anger is when a person uses their anger to control another person's behavior. The person is angry because the other person is not doing what he or she wants them to do. The angry person has learned that if they express anger, they get what they want. This anger can be verbally or physically abusive. Anyone dealing with this type of person may need professional counseling. If the victim cannot safely set a boundary in the presence of the person, they need to go to a safe place before trying to set a boundary to stop the abuse. This is a lot more involved than setting boundaries in safe situations. If we set a boundary and the other person becomes upset or yells at us, and there is no fear of physical abuse, we have a choice. We can stay in their presence or go to another room until they can talk about the situation rationally. We do not have to stay in the presence of someone who is upset or angry. Setting proper boundaries helps us gain more control of our lives. There are risks involved in setting boundaries, and we have to decide if we are willing to deal with the consequences. We have to count the cost. Are we willing to give up what we could lose when we set limits? If we are not secure in our relationships, we are faced with two bad options. One, we set limits and risk losing a relationship. Or two, we don't set limits and remain a prisoner of the wishes of others. In worst case scenarios, when we do set boundaries, the person may not talk to us anymore or may leave the relationship if they can no longer control us. Sometimes we have to allow the person or the people to choose to leave. For example, parents who subsidize their adult children with money, gifts, trips, etc., can exercise a large amount of control over them. Maybe the father taught his now adult son to obey by threatening to cut off financial support or to cut him out of his will. Maybe the adult son realizes what the control is costing him emotionally or spiritually. The son has to be prepared to give up an expensive lifestyle in order to regain his very self, his freedom. On the other hand, when the father sees the adult son is serious, he could start to change his controlling actions. That would certainly be the preferred outcome. One of the hardest boundaries to set is with those who have real needs. As a loving person, it will break our heart to say no to someone we love who is in need. When we do have limits to what we can and can't give, and we have to say no appropriately. We can burn ourselves out on noble as well as selfish causes. There are instances, I'm going to take a drink. There are instances where we truly want to give, but we are not able to. A biblical example of this is Moses in Exodus 18:14 through 18. Exodus 18, verses 14 through 18. When Moses' father-in-law Jethro saw all the people coming to Moses to inquire of God, Jethro said in verse 17, "The thing that thou doest is not good. Thou wilt surely wear away both thou and this people that is with thee. For this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone." Jethro taught Moses that he had limits and instructed him in how to delegate. We need to learn what our limits are, give what we are able, and if possible, help direct people to others who can help them when we can't. We can empathize and validate that their needs are real. We can encourage and pray for them. We may struggle with having to set limits with these real needs, as well as with those who are controlling, pressuring us, and making demands. If we are not true to what our heart tells us, we can passively comply on the outside, but be resentful on the inside. We must be aware when we are giving past the love point to the resentment point. Sometimes we pressure ourselves because we feel we should say yes. If we say yes to God or anyone else when we really mean no, we move into a position of compliance. Is that lying? Our lips say yes, but our hearts and often our half-hearted actions say no. Not being truthful to each other gives a false impression of where we are, as well as who we are. If we cannot control this external or internal pressure, we have lost control of our property, ourself. Setting boundaries are necessary for us and can ultimately be helpful for the other person. Sometimes, without realizing it, we can enable people to stay in unhealthy situations. Setting limits may nudge them to be more responsible and could be beneficial for them. 2 Corinthians 7, 8 through 9. 2 Corinthians 7, 8 through 9 addresses something similar to this concept. This is Paul talking, "For even if I made you sorry with my letter, I do not regret it, though I did regret it, for I see that that letter grieved you, though only for a while. As it is, I rejoice, not because you were grieved into repenting, for you felt a godly grief, so that you suffered no loss through us." As we start setting limits, maybe for the first time in our lives, it is helpful to have 2 or 3 supportive people to encourage and strengthen us. Fear of being alone keeps many people in hurtful patterns for years. There's also fear of the unknown. Being controlled by another person is a safe prison. You know what to expect. Someone who has to remain in a protective mode is losing out on freedom and love. There are serious risks to allowing another person to create high levels of stress for us. Dr. Hans Selye, the father of modern stress theory in medicine, says the greatest danger from stress is that caused by another person. If possible, we need to distance ourselves from people who cause us tremendous stress. We always own our boundaries. If we set limits with someone and they respond maturely and lovingly, we can renegotiate the boundary. Here are a couple of biblical examples. Jonah chapter 3. In Jonah chapter 3, God saw that Nineveh had repented, so he didn't destroy them. Acts 15:37 through 39. Acts 15:37 through 39. There was strong contention between Paul and John Mark, and Paul refused to let him go on a ministry trip. Then in 2 Timothy 4:11, Paul wants John Mark to come because he is profitable to Paul for the ministry. They reconciled whatever their difference was. When we set a boundary, we need to stay with it unless the person changes, like I mentioned before, or we have truly made an error. Some people change only when they run into a consequence. This is the principle of sowing and reaping. If we protect others from the consequences of their actions, we interfere with what they need to learn. Boundaries, when applied in the right place with the appropriate amount of fairness, make way for possibilities that aren't visible until we are free. Establishing and maintaining boundaries takes a lot of work, discipline, and most of all, desire. Saying no is essential to life. Every living cell has a membrane that allows certain needed nutrients to pass through and repels others. Every living organism needs such boundaries to protect itself. To survive and thrive, every human being needs to be able to say no to anything that threatens their safety, their dignity, and their integrity. We are responsible to live our own lives as God directs us. We are not charged to live our lives according to other people's personal rules, either living or dead. We cannot expect others to fulfill our expectations. Also, it's not our role, responsibility, or privilege to manage other people's lives. Control stifles their initiative and creativity and erodes their self-worth. It's inappropriate, therefore, for us to take charge of them or to entangle ourselves in a struggle with them over what they do. Other people are not bad or selfish just because they do not do what we would like them to do. It's not our place to judge someone for fulfilling their wishes or withdraw from them when they don't do what we want. We need to respect other people's boundaries. I want to talk about rescuing briefly. Rescuing may not be as loving as we might think it is. God's love lets people experience consequences. In rescuing, we can act as if the other person is our problem to solve. This shows disrespect for the person, and it can consume us. Rescuers hope that by once again bailing out the out-of-control person, they'll reap a loving, responsible person. We can rarely save others from their self-sabotaging behavior. They have to decide when the pain is too much. What happens if we stop rescuing? It gets us out of the way. We detach, step back, assume a neutral position, and let them work through their issues. When we mind our own business and we stop making ourselves crazy, and we can model a healthy, non-possessive way of relating in which we help them help themselves. This does not mean we abandon the person or stop caring for them. We can still have a critical role to play in their recovery. As a non-rescuer, we change our own behavior in relation to them and leave any changing of themselves up to their own doing. When we do set a boundary, it works better if we don't expect the other person to be angry or upset. Instead, we expect the person to accept our no with the respect we deserve. We can deliver our message with a smile, even on the phone. If we are smiling, we won't sound defensive or offensively hostile like we're expecting a fight. Use I statements like, I feel disappointed, instead of, you disappointed me. We can express our truth without making the other person wrong. Instead of saying, the shipment is late because you didn't order on time, we can say, the shipment is late because it wasn't ordered on time. State the facts with no blame or judgment. Here are a couple of examples before and after boundaries. Before, stop yelling at me. You must be nicer. After boundaries. You can continue to yell if you choose to, but I will choose not to be in your presence when you act that way. Before boundaries. You've just got to stop drinking. It's ruining our family. Please listen. You're wrecking our lives. After boundaries. You may choose to not deal with your drinking if you want to, but I will not continue to expose myself and the children to this chaos. The next time you are drunk, we will go to the Wilsons for the night, and we will tell them why we are there. Your drinking is your choice. What I will put up with is mine. It's important to respond to boundary violations instead of reacting. When we react, the other person is in control. When we respond, we are in control. In my closing comments, I want to share a quote by Bill Carter that I really like. Poor planning on your part does not necessitate an emergency on mine. I'm going to repeat that. Poor planning on your part does not necessitate an emergency on mine. Another book I really like is I Don't Have to Make Everything All Better by Gary and Joy Lundberg. I have 4 little posters from their book on my vision wall, which I read often. I'll quote 3 of them here. One says, I do not have the power to make anything all better for anyone else. I can offer my help, but I cannot make it all better. Another one says, personal boundaries are your value system in action. In setting effective boundaries, you must be kind, gentle, respectful, and firm. The first 3 make the last one work. The last little poster talks about the universal need. Every person needs to feel that I am of worth, my feelings matter, and someone really cares about me. Now I'm going to read a poem by William Blake. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not. My wrath did grow. Psalm 51:6. Psalm 51:6 says, God desires truth in the inward parts. If we speak truth to each other in love, even when we are hurt or offended, we clear our hearts and we can walk in freedom with each other. Biblical boundaries will lead us to a life of love, freedom, responsibility, and service. Okay. Any comments? Oh, yes.
So, most of you know I was an addict for quite a while, and one of the things that we talk about, one of the verses, is Romans 7:15, and it says, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do I do not do, but what I hate I do. And I feel like we've taught this kind of right on that. You know, we as human beings, we like to do things we don't want to do, we don't necessarily should do. And setting boundaries, personal boundaries also helps. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes.
So I wanted to just say that was really well put. I'd like to get that out. I'd like to add something.
Sure.
If it's okay.
Sure.
When you stressed fear, fear is the basis of, it's the core of everything. So I wanted to point out that fear, if you're angry or distressed in any way, it's usually because of a fear of some kind. And digging through that by asking one question, writing down the answer you get, asking another question, that's one way of getting through that. But I will say that fear, the anger and the resentment, your health can be one of your first indications of something something that's going on with somebody else. So I personally had an instance, I've had these happen to me before, but this one was pretty bad, where I had a very big anger to my youngest sister. And because of something really stupid she did. And my mother, and they clashed, and she made a poor decision, and there was a whole situation. After I came back from New Mexico, within days, it didn't cross my mind that this was even related. Sacrum, right down, this is your core. Your emotions sit here, your emotions there's no room for them in the head. That is why the gut feeling is what it is, because the emotions sit right here. So anytime you're happy or angry, the first thing that happens is something happens in your stomach. The first thing. That's because that's where your emotions sit. So, right in my sacrum, right at the top, I had excruciating and it wouldn't go away, and it wouldn't go away. Then I went to the chiropractor, and I did my therapy, I went to massage therapist, and I told her exactly what she needed to do, because I do medical massage every day, and it wasn't doing it. And I started to ask God, it's like, okay, look, you gotta tell me, like, today. First answer I got was a car. And I was like, car? Oh, car. Oh, yeah, they want to get the car? Yeah. Push her into the puddle and she picked the car because she was stupid. And I mean, I'm like, oh, car. The instant, I was like, I had this sharp, excruciating pain, the worst one I ever had right here. I sat down and I said, okay, we're gonna get rid of this. And I took a walk. And within 5 minutes, I craved that anger and I calmed it out. And the last 3 weeks, it has gotten better and better and better and better and better. And this week I've had almost nothing. So, and I've had things with my health. I've had friends who I've walked through. And once I help them through some kind of situation, like an anger or a resentment or something like that, and when they release it, almost most of their health issues go away. So I didn't mean to take up time. I was just going to say it real quick. But anyway, so the person who's having a problem with somebody can be something wrong with their health. It can be directly related to something that they need to help with.
Yeah, I'll make a comment about that. There is a book called Healing Back Pain by Dr. Sarno, and he goes through this information and talks about examples of people who had an emotional problem with somebody or something, and they got rid of it, and almost immediately they got rid of their physical problem. So it's very, very fascinating. Okay, any other questions or comments? Kevin?
Sorry for missing a few minutes of it, but I'm sure it was as good as what I heard. And I agree with everything you said. I think, though, we could add, unless I missed some of it, you can't truly rescue people if they're just a normal situation, because they're going to have to come to their own rescue, their understanding to solve whatever the problem is. But at the same time, having known people who we didn't understand how bad they were feeling killed themselves, we have to try to be aware, to try to see if there's a way of getting them to someone who would be better, besides prayer, obviously,
Right.
but to help them, to get them out of that super dark place. That's the one point. The other point was, some people, no matter how you say it, because of their either low self-esteem or just feel like maybe it is their fault, you can't, there's no way of saying something happened, like, how can I describe it? Something happened, and you almost can't say anything about it, because that person will immediately assume you mean that it's their fault, because everything they think you say is their fault, even if that's not the case, because that's just where they are.
Right.
So everything you said was really good. There are just some tough situations
Yes.
out there that we have to do what we can, try to go forward and back off, go forward and back off, and see if you can nudge them into something that's going to change the dynamic.
Right.
So anyway, coming up here on 265, I remember Jeremy's girlfriend had come with us, and I didn't know her very well at that point, and this has been a while back, and we were talking about different stuff, everything, and it's just hard for me to believe, that person he'd gone out with eventually killed herself, but yet her mom killed herself, older brother killed herself. So see, there's a
Yeah.
thing there. It just makes you feel like, had I only known,
Right.
maybe there was something could have been done, so.
Right. Well, in my opening thing, it's like, this is just a basic with boundaries. And obviously, if there's someone that you know that is in danger in some way of suicide or anything like that, you take different actions.
Yeah.
You reach out and help them. This is just the everyday kind of things that we live
Right.
our life and we get so overloaded. And sometimes people don't help with their comments. So kind of how to deal with that.
Average, normal functioning people.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, any other? Yes?
Yeah, so I use this principle a lot in my own life of the great prophet Clint Eastwood. He always says, man's got to know his limitations. And this is something my family knows well, as I've talked about it at some length. It's not just the negative side, you got to know your limitations, like I can't achieve. But there's more to it than that. It's a great guide in life because let's say you're at work and you're in a position and a client's asking you for something. You have to know what your proper limitations are
Right.
before you might need to bring somebody else in, that has more authority than you or has more sign off than you, or it happens in all kinds of situations in life, and it's really important to know your limitations. And everything has limitations.
Right.
And that's another, I use it in my thinking about when people are trying to convince me about things like evolution and other, there's always limitations. And if you think about the limitations of things, it can really help guide you to a good decision and not getting kind of off the track.
Well, right, yeah, because we can want to do good and want to do good until we burn ourselves out, and then we need help. So we have to balance that. Yes.
Well, two parts. First of all, for years and years since this boy was a month old, my daughter was dating his honorary uncle. Anyway, and that's how we met these people. And it got to where I was helping them all the time, and then they moved in with me, and the dad, the mom, and well, I guess the boyfriend did too. My older daughter was away at college, so it was okay. But and then the boyfriend, he was starting to bring books home from the library, and they were on Wiccan. And I told him, I said, I can't have that stuff in my house. You'll have to take it back, and if you need to look at it at the library. And anyway, so he got mad when he left. So, but this family, I had taken care of them for years, and finally, the boy and girl are he's almost 22 and she's 20, and so God told me at one point about 3-4 years ago, let go. You tried, you messed it up. He says that I'm going to take over from here, and I knew that he would be able to take care of it. But and I'll say, Father, that show me when to act and when to step aside out of your way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I kind of backtracked some, but they're really and they are my honorary grandson and granddaughter. I love them. But anyway, so they're leaving in 2 weeks. To a place of safety. They have very bad anxiety and are afraid to be alone. Anyway, so the thing is, maybe check with God first and before I mess it all up. Anyway, so and then my second question, it's a question. What were those words you said that lead to burn?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, your personal boundaries,
I'm sorry?
for your personal boundaries and action.
Yes.
let's see, it's toward the end.
And that was toward the end, yeah.
Yep, it's toward the end. Let's see. Oh, yeah, here it is.
I'm just not, okay. Go ahead.
Get my pages turned here. Okay, so in setting effective boundaries, is it, okay, you must be kind,
Kind,
gentle, respectful, and firm. I'm sorry, respectful and firm.
thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes,
Just something that could fit in. A lot of times, we see a need in someone else's life, like a niece, a nephew, or whatever, and there's a true need there and a lacking by someone else usually causing the need. And we can step in as a relative to help out and help, at least for a while, fill that need. Or at least show them there's other things that can be done.
right.
But don't, you can do that and take solace in what you're doing is the right thing, but don't expect a payback.
No.
Because it won't necessarily happen, but we do know God knows what you did.
Right.
And how you did it, in what frame of mind. Because I know there's like people who they don't realize that you really kind of sacrificed to do this because you saw the need,
Right.
but they never realized, you know.
Right.
Even though they did benefit and they did enjoy it, whatever. So don't get down. God knows what you do.
No, you need to be free to choose to, if you want to choose to give, you give, and you don't expect something back.
Exactly.
And I'll get to you in just a minute. I could stand up here and talk all day on this, but I had to pick and choose just some basics to give an idea. And if someone's interested, then there's a lot of information out there on boundaries and all the ins and outs of what you can do. Yes?
I apologize for being late and missed a little bit at the
Oh,
beginning.
that's okay.
Boundaries is really important to me because, as Damian mentioned, you know, I also come from roots of alcohol and drug problems and everything. And the biggest thing for me was boundaries. I didn't know how to set boundaries for myself, you know, and in my own life. And the part that you just shared it again about how you approach and mark those boundaries. You have to have confrontation, you know. And I didn't like confrontation.
Yeah.
I didn't like to set my boundaries, so I would just hold it all inside, you know, and then that would build up the anger and the resentment that was mentioned, you know. And I lived in a life of resentment, you know, and anger, and it just drove me. I drank to escape it. You know, alcohol became my idol. It's what delivered me from it. You know, alcohol and drugs. And so I had to learn to set boundaries, you know, and be able to make peaceful confrontation, you know,
Right.
be nice and kind, you know, because my other form of confrontation was not very peaceful.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you said. It's boundaries are so important, and the problem is that people that are dealing with anger and all those things too, they have exactly the same problem. So, in responding to it, like you said, you're setting an example, you know, and you're giving them something to learn from. You know?
Right.
And so that's so much better, I mean, of an approach, because you can get angry and say some things and everything and attack an alcoholic or drug addict or somebody who has anger issues, you know, but that's only exacerbating the problem.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to set their own boundaries, you know.
Right.
So, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Ron?
Really nice job, Shirley. You have a question I'd like to hear your response on. As Christians, the Bible teaches us to have a servant mentality to consider others better than ourselves. How do we reconcile that with personal boundaries?
Can I deal with that in my next seminar? When I did the next one, loving your neighbor, loving yourself, which I'm still finalizing, I had all this material, and I'm like, well, I want to do one on that. To me, that's a very important one, but so much of it overlapped that I was trying to figure out what goes with this one and what's gonna go with that one. So is it okay to wait?
We'll wait.
Okay, and, yeah, I addressed those very scriptures in that. Okay, anybody else? Yes, Jan?
You were saying that you had learned boundaries at age 15. I think I'm still learning it at 16.
Well, I started.
Oh, well,
I just started in my 50s, and I'm still learning.
It's just, there was one thing I was thinking that has been a real, boundaries is just, this whole subject has just been my whole life of learning what to do. And one thing, I didn't realize that I was controlling with my giving or my, servanthood or whatever. And I had to ask myself, we had a lesson on idols at one time, and I had to ask myself, what are the idols in your life? Well, my idols in my life were my kids. And I mean my kids, not to a fault, And I thought, God doesn't want any other idols before him, So, one thing I guess I learned, and I'm still learning, I'm not arrived at all,
Oh, me either.
is that, am I trying to play God in this person's life? Or am I gonna move over so God can have his way? And it's a lot tougher to do it that way.
Right,
But when you're with God, it makes it much easier. It's hard to watch,
right.
because I did lose a grandson to alcoholism just recently, and it's extremely hard to watch. But the cord had been cut, and God really, in my life, and I miss him, and I think, what could I have done? But he had chosen, he was free. I had to let him go and say, and then unfortunately he's not with us anymore. But I feel like in my life that he's at peace and I'm at peace, and hopefully in the resurrection, and I could think of all these things, well, do this and this and this. I can't get into that, because if I do, then I start blaming on him.
Right.
But I guess what I'm saying is, I had to get to a point of not playing God in this life. And I think I did a lot, so I think it's a tough lesson.
It is. There's another book I really like. It's called The Messiah Trap. And it's the Messiah looking out and taking care of everybody else.
Yeah.
And it has some excellent examples of how not to take God's place as Messiah in somebody's life.
And nurses are definitely in that range, I have been told, that are kind of that way. But anyway.
Okay. Let's see.
Anyway,
We got a couple minutes. Any other comments? Okay, I guess that's it. You're welcome.